Being a dad is one of the most rewarding roles we will ever have in our lives, but also can be one of the most overwhelming, where we find ourselves facing the pressures of juggling the demands of our family, careers, and life. This show will feature industry experts in mental health, social services, and personal development, along with resilient dad role models whose stories of overcoming the challenges of parenting get a new vision for the life you and your kids deserve. I'm your host, Pat DiDomenico, and this is the Resilient Dad Show. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Dad Show. I'm your host, Pat DiDomenico, and on today we have the honor of having Corey Gaidzionis here with us. Corey, welcome to the show.
Cheers, mate. I'm excited to drop in and have a chat.
Yeah, I'm excited for the topic that we're going to discuss with the work that you're doing to help kids, teenagers, but also being able to help the parents in turn. So you're the founder of the Big Emotions Academy, and the creator of the Little Book of Emotions. Can you tell us a bit more about in terms of the organisation and what you actually do?
I guess what we do is the organisation was kind of created as a tool to get the book out into the world, and then that's kind of evolved. So Big Emotions Academy is really about creating positive social emotional change in the world across generations. So I've just recently done my mental health first aid and added that in to be able to work with adults in emotional intelligence, teach people how to have conversations, how to communicate, how to connect, how to recognize when things aren't quite right in someone's life. And I think that's the way that mental health first aid has done that is really powerful. So that's kind of added in. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing with adults, and recently got a collaboration with FIFO Mental Health Group to deliver that content into the FIFO industry. And then the book itself it's a book which has characters, colors, stories, and questions which get people to look at what their emotional state is and understand what their emotional state is, and to help them understand that it doesn't need to be permanent. I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in these darker states of being depression, anxiety, anger, and don't really know how to move or shift those states of being, and end up in a perpetual motion of downward negativity, which is when we see chronic, depression and PTSD and these things. And I guess from my own experience, I've lived that. That's kind of been my journey of growing up in a pretty not a healthy environment and dealing with that with anger. So anger kind of became my protector. So I really understand that feeling of being out of control and being stuck in this anger and just having the smallest thing trigger you, to now I still get triggered. Obviously I'm a human, but rarely compared to how it used to be. It needs to be something quite big to have that visceral response. So I guess the book and Big Emotions Academy is all about how do we recognize the emotion that we're feeling? How do we identify that? What's happening for us in our body when we're feeling that way? So what's going on within our heart, within our body, within our mind, and then how do we shift that, or who can we talk to is the question that I ask in the book. Who can we talk to about it? So typically people don't have permission to talk about how they're feeling. So it's a question that I pose, who do you feel safe to communicate your emotions to? And that's something that I've been really honouring and practicing myself when I'm in something. Typically I would work through something, and then I'd say to someone, go, how was your week? I said, I was really in this stuff earlier in the week, where now I've kind of got two really good mates that I can kind of go, hey man, flick them a text message, I need a chat today, bro, so, and I think I do that because sometimes it's an issue with my wife that I don't want to talk to my wife about. I want to get some clarity before I bring that back to her and move the energy out of my body and be able to come back to her with some calmness rather than with a reactiveness. And then the last question is, what did I do to stop being angry? So, because people don't realize that they have this power to, I'm talking about anger because I'm familiar with it, but it applies to sadness and anxiety and depression and all those things as well. What did I do to shift that? So then there's a lesson in that, and that's CBT, like cognitive behavior therapy. So the book is actually teaching people how to reprogram their mind. Go, oh, when I was angry, this is how I got there. This is who I can talk to. This is how I was feeling, so they can recognize that more easily in the future. And this is how I moved through it. So the next time they're in it and go, oh, last time. So it starts to automate the process of shifting and moving through emotions. So I can feel emotions and then shift them very quickly because I've done a lot of practice of this CBT therapy.
Yeah, and it's a great point you bring up that it doesn't have to be a permanent feeling, and that, you know, we're all humans, so it's not like that you're not going to be triggered, but understanding the patterns that evolve for you to get to that place, and then understanding what are the things that you can do or that you have done before to overcome those feelings. And I love that you have, you know, two mates that you're able to have support of, to be able to get perspective. Because I find myself when I work through something in terms of talking through an actual, you know, problem or whatever it may be, and not just necessarily just going around in my head, that I'm able to see things differently as I say it and speak it, instead of just leaving it all within.
Yeah.
So, I love that. And so, was there a particular event or something that motivated you to move towards, you know, the mission that you are now with teaching people emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I was living in trauma my whole life, and I had an event that broke me. So someone at work died in my arms, and I don't need to go into the details of that too much, but that particular event, it broke me emotionally and it broke me mentally. And I just had this driving question or thought in my mind that if my mind is so broken, I can rebuild it however I want. So, and that question really drove me. And then I've just been working on myself for a number of years. And then I found out that helping other people made me feel better. So I started a charity working with kids and building bikes, and kind of that journey of healing has kind of led me down this path. And the more I've healed, the more deeply I've become connected with this work of creating positive emotional intelligence for other people to understand how they're feeling emotionally, I guess. And then more recently, the evolution of Big Emotions Academy, it wasn't even on the cards before COVID, but COVID kind of shut everything down that I was doing. I couldn't go and work in the gym. I couldn't go to high schools, and I just started asking the question. I guess I had this experience with students. Every teenage boy I meet will say if I have 15 boys on camp and I'll go, hey boys, tell me what your big emotions are. Anger, depression, anxiety, and this year particularly stress has been something else that's been added into that. But I started asking the question, well, how do I help these boys identify this stuff so they don't have to be stuck in it? And then
and what are the
the idea for the book then came into play of like, well, actually the message that I got was actually it's not teenage boys you want to work with, it's younger kids. And then I had the idea of like, how do I create a tool that parents and kids can communicate? So then when a teenager is feeling angry, instead of throwing their Xbox controller through their TV screen, they're able to go to their dad and go, hey, I'm feeling angry about this thing that happened in school today, or with one of their mates or mum or whoever.
And the kids that you're going through these big emotions that are telling you that, you know, they're feeling anxiety, depression and stress and so forth. What's a common theme or pattern that you're seeing? Because one of the things that I've realized that there's generally in terms of a consistency, or, you know, doesn't have to be exactly the same, but, you know, patterns create results. So what's some of the?
I think the pattern for boys is that they're not allowed to cry, right? There's still an ethos of big boys don't cry. So if a boy's not allowed to feel, those emotions, then what do with them? They suppress them, right? And if they're suppressed, at some point they're going to come out as, so when they're feeling sad, they're not allowed to feel that, so they'll express it as anger. That was certainly my experience, and it's certainly the experience of the research around boys, particularly having their emotions suppressed at a very young age. So I think that is the pattern. Like we talk about. I guess I talk to boys about what are you doing when you're feeling angry. So video games. I'm not saying video games cause anger, but video games cause frustration, and because they don't know how to deal with frustration, that then turns into anger. So they will scream at the screen, or they'll throw a controller, or whatever it is that goes along with that. So I think that's kind of a pattern. And I think the education system doesn't work well. I think that having kids sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day, when we kind of know from the research now we have about 90 minutes of like capacity to do what we would classify as deep work. So having kids sit in a classroom for 8 hours a day may not necessarily be the best way to educate our kids. I think our kids now are smarter than we ever were. They have access to more information than we ever did. If they want to have an argument with us, they just go to Google and go, hey, you said this, Dad, but Google actually said that. I mean, that's something I challenge my boys. If they come to me and go, Google said this, I go, well, what is Google saying about the opposite thing of that? I said, because I can find evidence to suit anything that I want, So I think there's a frustration with the education system. I think there's a drive, particularly in the environments that I work in, is in that private school sector primarily at the moment, is this desire for parents for their kids to go to university to get a degree and et cetera, et cetera. So there's this parental pressure, and then there's this school pressure for kids to perform, and we have rankings. All schools are ranked and based on how they get students into university and all these things. And I think all of those things are driving factors for this stress, which then drives anxiety, which then drives depression, which then drives anger. If I was to sum it up.
Yeah. And because I'm a big believer that our behaviour patterns are formed from a young age, and our biggest influences are our parents. Have you found, some of the parents in terms of with their kids, reading a book and being educated by, the things that you're teaching and going on your camps? How do you find the parents?
Yeah, I guess the feedback that I've had from parents is that they have a realisation that they have emotions that they don't actually know that they had. So I've had a mum come up and go like, I really feel a lot of anger. This was just at the gym on the weekend. I was actually sharing a story about a dad who had messaged me to go, hey, Corey, I didn't realise how angry I was, and so I started reading your book with my son every night. And then he started to he started to recognise his anger and go, so that when I'm telling my son off, that's not actually about my son, it's actually about me. And that's a really powerful insight, right? Because with insight, we can actually create change. But I think we have a lack of awareness as parents, and most of the parents in my generation are like 70s babies, maybe early 80s. And it was a different generation, right? Like I could probably talk to 10 men and go, hey, did your dad tell you to be seen and not heard as a child? And most of them would go, oh yeah, that was definitely, so then when we have, if we brought up with that, be seen and not heard, we're taught to not express our emotions, to not be sad, to not be angry, to not do any of those things, right? Is to compress them and compress them and compress them. And if you've got a video game where you put too much information into, this is what I talk to kids about, at some point it's going to explode out of you, and we might not recognize those things as explosions because we've identified it as normal. And normal, the simplest way to describe normal is like if I'm in my house and I've got the temperature at 24 degrees and I turn it up to 26, I feel uncomfortable for a few minutes and then I feel okay. I turn it up to 28, it feels uncomfortable for a few minutes and then I feel okay. Get it up to 32 and I'm kind of adjusted to that temperature. And then my mother-in-law comes into the house and she's like, why is it so hot in here? Because she's looking from the outside in, right? And we do the same with our emotions. So we kind of go, hey, I feel sad. And then our brain regulates to go, yeah, that's okay. Like, it's okay to feel that way. Like, you just, and we just park it, right? Instead of talking about it and communicate and going, hey, I'm not feeling great. The response is not just from men, but from women as well. I'm fine. I'm okay. How are you? Everything's all right. It's like really simple. And I acknowledge this in myself as a dad at school. He asked me, I run past him, we cross paths picking up the kids most afternoons. And he's like, yeah, you're always good, man. You're always good. And I just said, oh, actually, that's a lie, man. I'm not always good, but it's just what I say to you because I don't know whether it's safe to have a conversation with you about how I'm feeling. You know, so if we don't have people that it's safe to have a conversation with about how we're feeling, then it just builds up, you know. So this dialogue of I'm fine, it's what causes all the problems, right? Because we're not fine. We're actually in whatever state we're in, and we need to communicate whatever it is that we need to communicate and express. So yeah. I hope they answered the question.
Yeah, what you're mentioning, like for me, even as a child, it's like, you know, speak when spoken to, you know, be seen and not heard. So for me, one of my outlets was, you know, sports. So I always felt good when I was playing sports or there was some sort of physical activity. But then, like you mentioned with the kids with the video games, like you get to a point where in terms of if that is your only outlet and for you to feel good, you need to succeed in that, then you struggle with the losses. You know, I remember, I think it was under 16s, it was Victorian state trials. You know, I was fortunate enough to get to the last 20, but I didn't make the final 13. And for me, it was like literally the end of the world.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand that, you know, that's just part of life. Not always going to, you know, succeed in everything you do, and that's completely fine. All that is just you know, a lesson or a signal that there's need for improvement or things that you can do better to, you know, achieve the outcome that you're after.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. So what are some of the things that you've been able to do for yourself, to deal with, you know, some of those emotions that, you know, outlets or things that you've been able to overcome?
Well, I think the things that the tools that I use now are I go to the gym, I train. If I want to move anger, I find for me loading up a deadlift bar and just stacking and stacking and stacking and pulling that weight from the ground is a good way for me to move anger in a really controlled way. I find that I go to a boxing bag and I hit a boxing bag. It's very rare that the anger will dissipate. In fact, it'll probably build if I've not got the intention set correctly. I think just getting out of the house, going for a walk, removing myself from the space. When I first started dealing with my anger, I had a coach who just asked me to like look at my road rage. So when someone cut me off in my car, to like look at that with curiosity. I wonder what's going on for that person. I wonder what's happening with that. And it was really interesting. I got a mate who I consider to be very calm. We were coming back from a long road trip and I was in the right lane. There was a car in front of me. It was sitting on 90 Ks an hour. And I just put my indicator on and just changed into the left lane. And I just sat in the left lane and that car was going slower than the car in the fast lane. And he's like, man, I would have just lost my shit about that, you know, like, so it's interesting that, because that's how I would have been once upon a time, on the horn, flashing the lights, like what's going on, rah, rah, you know, but I was able to like create this bubble of like curiosity for other people and go, hey, like what's happening for them. And then at some point I was able to go like, where did that come from? You know, like for me personally, I've done a lot of inner child work, and that's difficult for people to comprehend inner child work. Like, what is that? Like, you know, but there's a beautiful poem written called 11, which is about a young girl who goes to school and she gets given this red jumper. There's this red jumper that's sitting in the lost property, and one of the girls says that belongs to you, and it gets given to this girl. And eventually she starts to cry and she talks about how she's 3 and she's 4 and she's 5 and that she's 11, but she's not really 11 yet. And she's all these other parts of ourself. And that's all of us, right? We're all the layers of ourself. And, Richard Swartz talks about this with, internal family systems, which I've found is a really beautiful way to deal with. So basically, internal family systems talks about how he had this girl in his room who had a split personality, and he got her to bring in their really angry version of herself and said, hey, like, what do you need from Sarah to not be showing up in the way that you're showing up, because you're like ruining her life basically. And we all have angry characters in our life that show up like this Jessica character, right? That doesn't serve us. So for me personally, I've been utilizing that process a lot to go, and I do it with a lot of my clients as well, to sit in and go, hey, let's have a chat with like the angry character that's in your psyche. Like what does he need? So let's go back and say, all right, so when was the first time that angry character showed up and why did he show up? You know, and it's often a childhood experience, and you take that angry character back to that version of self and you get them to say, all right, so I had a client who his dad gave him Christmas presents and the 2 brothers got into a punch up on Christmas Day, and the dad took away all the Christmas presents and threw them in the bin. Yeah. So from that moment in time, love was conditional. So he had a lot of anger towards his father about that. So we're able to take him back into his mind as an 8-year-old boy and say to his dad, hey, I don't feel loved. And then we're able to get the version of himself, the 40-year-old man that was in the room with me, to go to that 8-year-old self and go, hey, I'm here, I love you. And to create that connection to self, right? Like that is deep, deep healing work. And there's a lot to it, but Richard Swartz is the genius of it. I practice it a lot. I've done a lot of research around his work, but that internal family systems and just coming back to that character and going, hey, I don't need you anymore. I don't need you to show up as anger. I can do the job now. You know, and maybe another version will show up or he'll show up again, and you just have to keep practicing that. Hey, I'm going to retire you. So it's like this higher level mind game that you can actually play with yourself to go, hey, and I don't do it when I'm in the moment. Like it's afterwards I go back and go, hey, like have a conversation with all these layers of myself. And it sounds woo-woo a lot, but it really works. It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah. It's, for me, myself, growing up, I was very close with, my grandparents, and for them in the generation that they grew up, with the war and that, poverty. So food was a massive thing for them to show a way of love. And me being a child with, some childhood traumas and experiences and so forth, I got to a point where I think I was 10, not even 10 years old, and was nearly 83 kilos. So me forming that pattern of emotional eating, and then later on that continued on through sort of, my early childhood. And then I was fortunate enough. I grew when I was a teenager and became very active with sports and so forth. But later on in life, it showed up again as soon as I, stopped being as active, started working for myself, then having, the stresses and so forth. So my go-to was food for comfort. And then being able to say to myself that, I appreciate, that you love and, this is your way of loving and caring for me, but I don't need you anymore. And that was my way of pretty much letting go of that habit. I don't need that to feel okay anymore. And I'm putting a different meaning and understanding that my grandparents only did that because that was their understanding of, showing love. It's not that they were trying to, be feeders or anything like that.
Well, no, it was actually their trauma, right? So when they grew up, they struggled to like have food, right? So then in their psyche, for them, one of their core values is like, well, I'm going to make sure that my kids and my grandkids grandkids have food every time they come to our house. Like, it's literally a trauma response. Like that is where that comes from. It's it's super fascinating how trauma plays out, right? Like you have the story of the twin boys who grew up with the drunk dad. One goes, I'm never going to drink again. I'm never ever going to drink alcohol because of how my dad is, and the other one becomes a drunk. Like it's the parody of the two, you know, and that's exactly what played out there, right? They had no food growing up, so then when they could afford it, they had an abundance of food for everyone because they didn't want anyone to experience the trauma that they experienced.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, you know, you're mentioning about the current education system and some tools and that you've been able to use to help for yourself. But what do you think are things that the education system could do to actually improve and support the younger kids?
Yeah, I think adding like meditation to like the start of the day. I think one of my visions for my book is to have that as a part of curriculum for, you know, year 1, 2, 3, 4, where every day they go into their classroom and they do an emotional check-in. Imagine having a book on the table where the teacher actually knows the emotional state of the room. She's got a kid who's anxious for 5 days in a row. Oh, there's a conversation to be had with the parents. There's a conversation to be had with the school psychologist, counsellor, whatever. You know, it creates opportunity to like see patterns as you were talking about before, but it also creates opportunity for a teacher to go, maybe I've got 10 kids who are anxious. Maybe I could start my day with some box breathing. So in the book, there's a box breathing QR code that they can just literally don't even know how to do it. They just scan a QR code and it comes up on the screen and runs kids through it. You know, and box breathing is a really powerful tool it's a really simple tool that can reset the nervous system, you know, and calm kids down. So I think that's one of my visions for how I think primary school can change how they do things. I think in high school, our high school are changing that. We had a think tank a few weeks ago and the principal wants to run 90-minute sessions. They just do 3 classes a day rather than 6 classes a day. They do a 90-minute session and they get 1 day a week where they get to decide whether they want to come to school or do study from home or come in and do a group of 6 with a lecturer, or if one kid needs support in a class, they can come in and see the teacher. So really giving students that flexibility to design their own week in a really healthy way, to have sport as a compulsory thing in year 11 and 12. They're talking about having like mental health walks in the morning. So when the year 11 and 12 kids get to school in the morning, they go for a walk around the oval and have a conversation and connect about what's going on in their world and what's happening in their lives. It's this, I think that's a good step towards moving towards a different style of education. I think the education is from 1950s, you know, it was designed to serve the Henry Fords of the world. Unfortunately, we're not in that. We're not in that age anymore, right? We're in this technological age and the world is moving at a rate of, you know, 1,000x at the moment. I've just joined a community that's based out of the US, which is talking about how do we bring in sacred packages into modern technology? How do we create connection and community and create positive change in the world? So like that's really exciting to kind of be a part of that. But I think as parents, as parents, what we need to do is like observe where our kids are at, what's happening in their world, how they're feeling, what's going on for them. Are things changing? Are they positive? Are they negative? Like what are the conversations that we're having with our kids? But yeah, I think the education system, I think what they're doing at our school is going to be a good step forward in terms of shifting what education looks like. I don't know enough about it to go, hey, for me, I think that every school should take every kid on a school camp for a week every term in the bush with no mobile phones, with total disconnection from the world. Like to me, that's what I would do. If I ran a school, that would be like, this is what we do every term. We're going to take a week out to go bush, and then what are the curriculum based activities that we can do while we're disconnected from the world.
Yeah, just even to recharge and not have that constant, activity of everything that we get fed with our phone. It's surprising the amount of actually hours that we spend on our phone. If you review at the end of the week, and there's the thing where you can see, where you've spent your time and that, and you're like, no wonder I don't have as much time as I think I could have, because I'm just it could be 10, 12 hours a week. That's half a whole day.
I think with our phones, I think having breaking our hours into quarters and going every 15 minutes, what am I doing for this 15 minutes and this 15 minutes, and doing that once a quarter to see how we're actually utilising our time creates opportunity to actually use our time more effectively. I don't think.
Yeah.
The research shows we get 90 minutes of productive time in a day, so that's what I try to do, 90 minutes of productive work when I'm working for myself. And when I'm on a course, teaching a course or whatever, then I'm in a course for a whole day. But when I'm doing creative work, I just try to do a 90-minute block or 2 45-minute blocks with a 10-minute rest in between, and I think when school realises, I think the real change in school is they need to go, how do we create a program that talks about emotional intelligence? How do we create a program that talks about critical thinking? How do we create a program that is about entrepreneurship? How do we create, and I think when they start getting to that space where we're teaching kids to be critical thinkers rather than regurgitators, the system will be different, right? Giving kids time at school up to year 10 to have no homework.
Yeah.
Why do they need to learn university habits in year 8 or year 7? That was a response that the school gave to me when I said, why do you give the school homework? Oh, they need to learn how to function at a university independently. I'm like, yeah, but I get it. Year 10, 11, 12, maybe split ATAR over 3 years instead of 2 years. Have a unit you're doing year 10, so it reduces the load for year 11 and 12. There's all these things. But I wish I had the answer.
Now, being able to give the kids the opportunity to think, outside of the square and to be more engaged with one another instead of just pretty much being dictated by a teacher and then having their head stuck in books. I completely agree. I don't think that's the best solution, for their own development, and having those life skills by teaching them those things. I think that's a lot more valuable than, learning necessarily, science or something that is non-related to something that I'm not even interested in.
Yeah, it's interesting because a maths teacher will tell you that algebra is teaching you how to think critically.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I used it other than year 7 maths.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Did it teach you to look for solutions to problems?
No, I think other things probably taught me that.
But anyway, it's interesting that when you talk to teachers, they're so the challenge is it needs to change at university level, right? Yeah, and then that'll become the driver for the new system until the university starts teaching teachers differently. Then the system is going to still keep churning out the same. So I don't see that changing immediately, but I see that there's lots of conversation within the education system about having a student first focus rather than a curriculum focus. So lots of schools are curriculum focused. If we become student focused, all of a sudden it becomes different. Even the interview for the school, both of my sons are going to the same high school. They're 3 years apart, and my second son just had his interview a few weeks ago, and I was blown away at the difference in the interview. Just from, hey, what we want to know from your child is what do they want to do? What do they want to become? How do they want to go into the world? Do they want to be an entrepreneur? Do they want to be a sportsman? Do they want to be do they just want to go work for someone? Do they want to go to university and become a doctor? Yeah. And then how can we have pockets of the school tailored to suit those kids, So at my son's school, I have a football academy. He plays soccer. But what does that look like? Do they go, okay, one day a week you can go to this school that has a soccer academy and do a day of soccer training?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's interesting to see that's how they're kind of just the way they interviewed and the way they thought about it was different.
Well, that's great to see that in that period of time that there has been that change. So hopefully that's signs of improvement.
Changing leadership, mate. That's what it was.
Yeah. Oh, that can make a big difference. Yeah. So, what's if there was one thing that you could completely change, and out of all the things that you've seen, what would that be?
One thing I can completely change, I think teaching kids how to be quiet with their own mind is the one skill that I would teach in the education system from a very young age. I think it's so critical to be able to sit with your mind and then identify what's going on in your body to go, oh, I feel a bit yuck, so before I come on here, I had a lot going on. I just said to my wife 10 minutes, I said, I'm going on a podcast shortly. I just need some time just to sit quietly before I come into this space, And then it's funny. And then I went and did a nervous poo before I come in, right? Because my body was had this nervous energy, and and that's how I shifted it in this particular instance. But I think that skill set, if we can teach kids how to be calm with their mind, then they can identify what's going on in their lives, right? Much sooner than if they don't. I'm listening to Gabor Mate's book at the moment, The Myth of Normal, and he goes, I was so disconnected from my body that I had a growth the size of an avocado and I didn't even know it was there. Yeah. That is just insane, if we can quiet our mind, our body will soon tell us what is going on, I think teaching kids how to connect to their bodies and to shift emotions is a really powerful thing. I think that as something that could actually be done in a really simple way for schools, I think that is the number one thing that I'd introduce into the change. I think teaching emotional intelligence, how to communicate, how to express, how to identify, how to have conversations. I think that's a whole curriculum of someone much smarter than me that could create. For me, I'd love to get a PhD project done on my book. I don't know whether it'll happen. There's too many moving parts, but that's kind of what I'm leaning into. How do I create this as a piece of evidence for schools to use as a tool? The challenge is they're stuck in their ways and they don't want to shift. So it's about how we pitch it, right? How we face the resistance.
Well, that would be a great, solution and outcome if all kids were able to be a lot more still within themselves and in their own minds and body to be able to see what's going on. So, Corey, where's the best place for people to connect with you and get in touch with what you're doing?
Just Big Emotions Academy. If they Google Big Emotions Academy or just go www.bigemotionsacademy.com, everything that I do is basically on my website. They can go there. They want to talk about bringing me in to do mental health first aid, or they want to talk about bringing the book in. We do have a fundraiser where schools can buy the book at a heavily discounted rate and use that to raise $800 for their school community while getting the books into their community. Big Emotions Academy is really where everything's at. And then obviously if you throw my name in the show notes, my surname across Facebook and the socials, that's pretty much how I show up.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for your time today and sharing all the great stuff that you're doing. And I really hope that with more of what you're doing out there, it's going to be able to help our future leaders and our kids for tomorrow. So thanks again.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
So if you guys got value, please do connect with Corey. I highly recommend his book. I got the video version of it, and it was a great tool to to connect with my kids also, and it also helps me with some perspective and some thoughts of my own emotions. So definitely highly recommended to connect with him and get a copy of the book. Hope you guys gained value from today's session, and look forward to hearing from you guys next time. Hey everyone, I really appreciate you listening to today's show. It means a lot to me that you are part of the journey and mission to help fathers be the best dads possible. I'd really appreciate it if you review the show and share it with someone you genuinely believe could benefit from this content. Please visit resilientdad.com for more content and resources as we build this community for dads everywhere.